with that, let's go ahead and talk about this CIA tradecraft review. Is a declassified tradecraft review looking at the assessment of the Russian interference in the 2016 election. I don't want to relitigate this, but I'm just going to take you through some of the high points and the things that I thought were interesting here. So this is a tradecraft review. So it is actually looking at how the sausage was made and the processes and the decisions that were made in support of arriving at this specific conclusion, which was that, again, and their conclusion was that Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote unquote, aspired to help then presidential candidate Donald Trump win the 2016 election. That was their assessment. The assessment was not that there was any material changes to the election or that interference changed the outcome. With that, there's a handful of things that I think bear pointing out. I have this stuff in the report this morning. It's much longer. We can't possibly go through all these details. However, media leaks in early December 2016 that suggested a definitive conclusion had been reached before the initial assessment process had concluded. CIA says, quote, risked creating an anchoring bias. Now, this is very important because there are many forms of bias, and any intelligence analyst should know them well. Anchoring is essentially being prematurely exposed to someone else's conclusion. And psychologically, you may be susceptible to anchoring bias when you allow someone else's conclusion to anchor your own conclusion. And so this was, I think, one pretty clear-cut form of not only illegally leaking, and I'm not sure that we actually ever found those leaks. They probably, I don't want to say they come from the top, but if you consider that this whole process was politicized, it would just make sense that someone at the very highest levels selectively leaked this kind of information for political purposes. And so that's the first thing to point out. The second thing is this report gives us numerous cases of these irregular processes that were involved to arrive at the final assessment. I think one of the big conclusions that this tradecraft review finds is that this process was rushed, and you go through and you kind of ask yourself, why was this rushed? So this was rushed to be published, or at least published for policymakers in December 2016. I'm not sure if this was maybe part of an effort to try to overturn that election. However, it certainly appears that this would have been at least one justification for doing that. Pulling like a Romanian election where this guy's going to win and we don't like it. And so let's say justifiably or unjustifiably, let's just say that Russia helped him win the election and we need to have a do-over in the elections. That's exactly what happened in Romania. Could have happened here. At any rate, there's a long laundry list of irregularities, and you can read about it in this morning's report. I just, again, pick out the high points. The second biggest conclusion for me was that then Director of the CIA, John Brennan, was involved in almost all of these irregularities, including receiving intelligence in July of 2016. And then he formed this little clique of a working group to investigate it. And he didn't share any of that intelligence with the broader intelligence community until December 2016, when he ordered this rushed assessment. Also, this assessment was found to have been primarily aided by what we call single source information. So this is a single piece of intelligence, and it could have been a human intelligence report from a highly placed source that may have been credible. It could have been a signals intelligence intercept, which, SIGINT for a long time, SIGINT forever, basically my entire career, was considered the gold standard. I believe it still is. If you have two people talking on a phone about some highly sensitive information that they do not want to get out, and yet we have intercepted it, then, it's pretty damning evidence there. And yes, there's deliberate deception that could be happening there as well. But just in general, you know, we used to say two things: officers love pictures, and officers love SIGINT. So I'm not sure what that single source of information is, but relying on single source information is inherently vulnerable, because if you're an intelligence analyst, one of the things you're trying to do is either confirm or deny a certain piece of information. And that when you have this all source approach, when you use signals intelligence and imagery and open source and human intelligence and all the other ints that you may have available, we can say, we can maybe get a signals intercept that this leader of this foreign country or an insurgent leader says, oh yeah, my associate, whatever, is at this specific location. And so we get that signals intercept. Okay. And then maybe we send in, maybe we have some surveillance, or we have some ISR asset, or we have signals intelligence from that guy's cell phone that confirms that, oh yeah, he actually is in this place. So we can take these two pieces of information that were collected independently and put them together and say, yeah, we have two independent sources of intelligence that say that arrive at the same thing. They're saying the same thing. And you can do that when you have multiple sources of intelligence to confirm that. The problem with single source information is that there's no way to confirm it. It's a single source of information. We have no other intelligence assets or no other sources of intelligence that are saying that this is true or this is not true. And so that is why relying on single source is inherently vulnerable. And that is one of the things that CIA did in this assessment. And from the reading of it, at the urging, or actually it's more than urging, at the order of John Brennan, who again was the then CIA director. Also, there's a couple of sections here about the Steele dossier, which has been debunked and widely discredited. One of the most important things was, I'll just read you the quote here. Quote, FBI leadership made it clear that their participation in this intelligence community assessment hinged on the dossier's inclusion, meaning that FBI Director Jim Comey or whatever senior leadership at the FBI was making this decision said, we're not going to play ball unless you include the Steele dossier, which again has since been very widely discredited. And so when that happened, there were two senior mission center leaders at CIA who said, we don't want any part of this. Do not put the Steele dossier in this assessment because it does not meet tradecraft standards, or it does not meet the analytic rigor that we need. And actually, one person actually emailed John Brennan and said, quote, including it in any form risks the credibility of the entire paper. And then Brennan personally overruled those objections. And one of the other things is that this review finds that the overall assessment, quote, did not merit the high confidence level that was applied to it. So my takeaway here, things that I think you should know is, number one, this tradecraft review actually does not dispute the core assessment that Putin, quote unquote, aspired to help Trump win the 2016 election. The report specifically states that, quote, the overall assessment was deemed defensible. However, it does find that the assessment's high confidence statement was unwarranted. And again, as I understand it, just reading through this, it's only 8 pages. It's pretty dense though. My understanding from just reading through it is that high confidence assessment was assigned primarily due to this single source of intelligence information. And that would be analytic malpractice. At least that's what this report says. The National Security Agency, for instance, NSA, objected to that high confidence level. They suggested their own moderate confidence. And when we talk about confidence, okay, so you have a piece of reporting. Let's say you have a signals, or let's say you have a human report. Let's just go with that. Okay, so this is a human intelligence source or asset subject reporting some piece of information. Okay, so not only do you have a credibility statement or reporting history from that source. So if this guy's been a source for for many months or several years, and he has a long history of reporting, we can go back into that body of intelligence that he's produced, or the intelligence information reports that he's produced, and judge the veracity overall and say, actually, this guy's produced 20 reports and 17 of them are confirmed. Okay. So, and maybe the 3 other were, who knows, whatever, they weren't confirmed, but 17 out of 20 is pretty good. Okay. That would make him a reliable source. So that's one thing that we can use to judge the veracity of this new piece of information. I don't know whether it's true or not, but this is a reliable source. It doesn't mean that this latest thing this guy is saying is true, but it could lead me to believe that's maybe more likely true than not, or that would at least be a positive factor in that assessment. So when you make an assessment, you have to arrive at a conclusion. You can't just tell policymakers, well, I mean, you can tell them you don't know, but on something like this, you have to arrive at a conclusion that is more or less defensible. And then you apply some level of analytic confidence. Like, I have high confidence in this conclusion. We strongly believe that this is the case. Or maybe you say, I have low confidence in this. We believe this is what happened, but we're not entirely sold. Or we believe that this is what will happen, but I'm not swinging for a grand slam here. I have a low confidence. So at any rate, NSA said they applied moderate confidence to this assessment. And again, that was overruled by John Brennan, who applied a high confidence statement to the assessment. I do just want to point out a couple of things. Previous independent assessments, including one from the special counsel, concluded that Russia's attempted influence campaign did not have an impact on the election outcome. Also, this report states that credible intelligence implicating Russian support for then candidate Hillary Clinton was omitted from this assessment process. And the report states that suggests that, quote, Putin was more ambivalent about which candidate won the election. And on that point, I think there's way too much focus on, people say, oh, Xi Jinping wants this person to win. Xi Jinping wants Biden to win, or, whatever. And yeah, maybe that was the case. I think more often than not, these world leaders, I mean, of course they have a preference, but what, realistically, they're going to do what they're going to do regardless of who gets elected. So I think there's way too much focus on saying, oh, Putin wants this guy, or Xi wants this guy, whatever. So the second point here is that this report does identify many abnormal decisions made by senior leaders, especially then director of the CIA, John Brennan, that were made during this assessment process. Even if the conclusions were accurate, which again, this report does not dispute the overall conclusion there. But you have Brennan, you have then FBI Director Comey, then Director of National Intelligence Clapper. They all very clearly committed numerous cases of analytic and ethical malpractice to the point of negligence. And I think this was the major conclusion of the report. On that point, to conclude here, the U.S. intelligence community exists to serve policymakers with objective intelligence to support their decision-making process. Decisions become, in some cases, much easier when you have reliable intelligence that informs you with key details of the situation. Okay, this is like you're playing chess, and when you can see all the other players' chess pieces, your ability to move your own pieces becomes easier. When you can't see the opponent's chess pieces, you move your pieces with much greater risk because you don't know what's out there. You don't know what's waiting on the other side after you move. And so this is one, intelligence reduces uncertainty about the future. The better intelligence we have, the more certain we can be, or at least the greater amount of uncertainty we can reduce, which reduces the overall risk of making these decisions. I'm not in a position to say, obviously I'm not an attorney or a prosecutor. I'm not in a position to say that any laws were broken here. I doubt any specific laws were broken, but I will leave that up to a prosecutor or the Department of Justice. But ethical standards were obviously violated. Also, I don't expect anyone will be criminally charged. Nobody's going to jail for this. And that means the only accountability is going to be in the court of public opinion and the public perception of Brennan, Comey, and Clapper's obviously highly unethical actions. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to